38 when I started the company. Really didn't have much success until year 6, and then it started to really take off. And we went from $500,000 in sales for like 5 years to then tens of millions just a couple years later to 100 million 7 years later, and then hundreds of millions now at this point. Something that happened that I wouldn't have expected. I sadly went through a divorce and I lost everything. Every single day, it was hard to wake up. I was never diagnosed with depression, but I had to have been. It was very, very, very hard. People ask me what motivates me. At the end of the day, I could give you some neat sounding clip of being driven or da-da-da. I want to go to heaven. It's not the same for everybody, but I always laugh at people that put all the discipline and effort that they have into eating healthy and financial goals so that when they're 65, they can retire. And I'm like, what? You get 20 years with a pickleball out of that. That's neat. And a couple of cruises. I mean, wow, you finally have your Ferrari.
Welcome back to Durand On Demand. I'm joined as always by our gracious host, Dave Durand. Dave,
Nico, is it over the top to be like hyper promoting swag?
No, not at all. It's not.
It's not. Cheers.
Cheers.
Boy, coffee tastes so much better in one of these cups.
It does.
Yeah,
It does.
I had some the other day without it. It didn't even look good. All right, I don't know. I don't even know why I did that. I didn't have the plan to.
No, all
and
good.
I literally didn't even. I don't even care if somebody buys the swag. I just think it's funny. I like it, so that's why I have it.
I have the backpack. I have the coffee mug that I use every day. My water container, which I didn't bring it today, but
yeah,
it's useful stuff. So definitely. In fact, if you are watching this right now, and you are a part of our newsletter, I'm going to go ahead and send you a coupon code to get any Leading Giants / Durand On Demand merch. How's that?
That sounds great.
Awesome. So I'll send them 10%. We good?
Send them that.
All right, cool.
By the way, I have another thing we want to talk about.
Yeah.
I want to invest $1 million into a business from one of our Leading Giants participants, somebody that subscribes to the newsletter or is a part of our program. And basically what I'm looking for is something that's expandable. Okay, so what a lot of people have is they've got a local business that could have 5,000 locations. They just don't know how to scale it.
Yeah.
And if it's not physical locations, they could go from 2 or 3 people providing a service at a certain amount of efficiency to 1,000 people providing that same service across the country. They don't know how to lead, scale, or build a company, but they've got an MVP, a minimal viable product, okay? And if they have that or service, I'm looking for a company that would be small like that. So, obviously if you're gonna buy a big organization, $1 million doesn't go very far. But if you're gonna buy a smaller organization, or at least a portion of a smaller organization to scale it, you can get a lot done with something like that. Yeah. Now, I don't wanna operate it. That's the thing. I wanna find a great operator who is willing to take some counsel and some guidance that is going to want to scale and build it.
That's good. That's good. You heard it here first on Durand On Demand. If you have an MVP and are looking for potentially to either sell or partner up with a great investor here, you can definitely do that. Dave, switching gears here a little bit. So today I wanted to press you on, we get a lot of comments, and again, I'm in charge of the social media here, so I filter through a lot of the stuff. Sometimes I'll send you comments and I'll kind of chuckle and we'll go back and forth on how to respond if it's worthwhile, right? But one of the comments that every now and again we'll get is, why should I listen to Dave? And so I want to backtrack a little bit, twofold. One is, why should I listen to a 9-figure CEO on how to be an employee? He's so far removed, whatever. The second one is, why should I listen to Dave? What sort of credibility do we have? So let's backtrack and start with your work history. I think that's important to note. You didn't start as a 9-figure founder and CEO at the age of 1.
I didn't. And it is actually, so I respect this. You've heard me give the analogy before, like if you were on the side of the road injured, and somebody came by and said, put pressure on this and take these 2 pills. And you were like, who are you? And they're like, I'm an Uber driver. I just happened to come by. Mm-hmm. You're like, I don't know if I should do that. If they're like, I'm a surgeon at Johns Hopkins. You're like, I'm on it. I'm doing what you said. And so knowing what the history is, it matters. And there's so many people online right now who give advice that they've never done. I actually had somebody, I don't often do this. You know this, Nico. I oftentimes don't know what the topic is going to be until we sit down and you throw it at me like this. And I like that, actually. I like the kind of, sometimes there's a time to prepare, other times there's a time to be spontaneous like this. Right. But you manage, along with a team of people, social media. And that doesn't mean that that all of my comments are done by people other than me, even if they are done by somebody else in my voice. If it's particular, you guys come to me and you say, we need to, we need to have you particularly respond to this particular thing. So in other words, in one way or another, there's a personalization of those things. Yep. But I know that I don't have time to sit there on social media. And I also know that it's just bad for you mentally, right? And emotionally to spend too much time on it. So, so you guys do this. But on occasion, I will, and you also know this, I don't even have access to a lot of my social media. You've got all the codes, and I'm like, hey, how do I even I haven't looked at Facebook in forever. How do I do that? Yeah. But there's a couple of them that I have already on my phone. I don't know why you've done this or whatever, and I can just click on it, and wow, I'm like, wow, I actually have like the credentials to comment. Yeah. So there was a person who sent a message to me saying, you should really go to my leadership seminar. And I responded back and I said, cool, sounds like a good seminar. What have you led before? Mm-hmm. And he responded back with all of the leadership certifications that he has, but has never led anything at all. Now, by the way, that to me does not mean a person can't teach leading. It doesn't mean that. There are, Jim Collins, for example, is a great researcher. Pat Lencioni, he does lead the table group. He leads a group of 15 people, and they're a scrappy, good company, and that's awesome. That's true leadership. He leads others too. But his primary understanding of leadership is through the study of human nature, and he's brilliant at it. So there are people like that have not led big organizations that can still teach you how to do it. Sure. So I don't believe that everyone has to do that. But if they don't tell you where they get their knowledge, there's going to be something else fake in what they do. Like a lot of the people like how to earn 7 figures in a year that have never done it before. Now, okay, if you said, listen, how do I know how to make 7 figures in a year? Because I went from this to 7 figures and this is how I made my money, fine. Or if you said, because I studied 100 people who've done that, even though I haven't. Okay, I could listen to that too. I don't need a batting coach who held the record for home runs, as long as he knows how to teach people how to bat. But there's a sincerity about it that matters here. And so the question, I think, is a good one. I would rather not talk about myself, but I also know that if the surgeon from Johns Hopkins on the side of the road is unwilling to tell you who he is, you're not going to take his advice. Right. So that was probably too long.
No, that's a good.
But you can edit this.
That's a good setup. I think it's important because twofold, like you said, there are a lot of people online, and so to everyone's credit, who's asking why should I listen to Dave, I think it's important to kind of vet your sources and see that they are worthy of listening, and you have the authority. So, kind of going back here a little bit. You started, we talked about it in our last Durand On Demand episode, and so I'll link it somewhere here in the descriptions. But you started with leading a small team, and then eventually growing that division of a company that you worked for to the point. It
started way before that.
Oh, okay. So yeah, break it down for me.
Okay, it started when I had a paper route, and I was 10. And I would have to ride my bike in the summer delivering tons of pounds of paper. I mean, back in the day, this was like a heavy day, okay? And in the wintertime, slipping and sliding on my bike or just walking miles to deliver this in the snowstorm. And my parents, to their great credit, just let me do it. Now, obviously, if it was going to be so dangerous out that I would get frostbite, they were great parents and they would have been there. But what made them great parents is not making me comfortable all the time, and they didn't do my work for me. I had to get out there and do it. I had to collect, so you're ringing a doorbell saying, you owe me 50 cents? All these different types of things that you don't feel like doing when you're young. I learned to delegate to my brother who was 2 years younger. Hey, come along. And he'd come along, and I'd hand him some papers, and he'd run along while he's in second grade, handing them over here and handing them over there to get the job done on a day that was a little harder. My older brother started a paper out, actually, before I even did. So I was subordinate to him, and I learned how to be subordinate to somebody who I felt like was more my equal. So I needed the humility to do that. I didn't know any of these lessons were being learned at the time, by the way.
Yeah.
I was just trying to get the dang paper out done, you know? And, but that's where it started. And then it went into picking corn in cornfields for almost no money at all. It was like, I don't know, like $1 an hour or something like that. And then, or actually, no, you were paid well to pick it. I think you were paid like $2 or $3 an hour. But you had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. You jumped on the back of a pickup truck, by the way, not in a seatbelt or anything, going along country road, jump out with a bunch of other young kids, and you pick the corn. And then sitting outside in an obscure place, they drive you out miles and just throw some bags on a table, and you'd sell it. Yeah. People would drive by, and you were out there all day selling corn for like $2 an hour. And gosh, so many jobs like that. In high school, cleaning a bar that was, I think, haunted, by the way. They always said it was haunted. And when you went into the basement of this bar, because they used to take from the bar itself, they would throw the bottles down a chute into the basement. Man, that was a creepy place to go. And then cleaning toilets at a bar afterwards, not fun. Flipping burgers at Hardee's. Cleaning this industrial facility. Mm-hmm. And having to sweep the floors. And this thing was like, I don't know how many, I didn't have a ability to scale, but it had to be 20 or 30,000 square feet, maybe more than that. And it just took forever, days to sweep it. And man, the amount of like stuff I had in my lungs probably from that I didn't know, tarring roofs, landscaping, moving rocks around, all of these different things, up to and including before I sold Cutco. And all of a sudden, I was working so hard with my hands and working so many hours and getting up early and doing these things that all of a sudden now I had to just make a phone call and talk to somebody and sit at a kitchen table and convince them to buy some knives. By the way, that was hard and awkward in many different ways, very different ways. But in a way, I always kind of felt spoiled. I was like, wait, I just called on the phone, met with a person, made a sale, and I earned as much doing that as it would have taken me 8 hours of breaking my back. Mm-hmm. This feels like cheating. But the lessons that I learned from all those other jobs, and I haven't even named half of them, were very, very, very important. And I guess one of the reasons I'm talking about that is that some people will say, oh, this guy is a silver-spooned guy who doesn't understand the common man and probably wouldn't even pay people well and blah, 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 blah. And these are people that don't know me and that don't know my family, that don't know my children and don't know my neighbors and don't know where I came from. Big Bend, Wisconsin, where the nicest car was an old Ford Taurus, okay? And the biggest home wasn't very big. And you learn how to do these things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to get into some of these comments here because I think you shedding light into your history. And by the way, I feel like the fact that you had 10 years of work history from 10 to 20 before you started leading goes to show that you have to put in the work and that you're not entitled to lead people just because, you have a piece of paper that says I've graduated from here and have absolutely no work experience.
Or a birth certificate, which is what young people think now. Because I have a birth certificate, everyone should listen to me.
Right.
Okay, well, if everyone's going to listen to you, who's going to listen? Who are you going to listen to?
Right.
Everyone can't lead. This is a big lie. And by the way, 75% of Gen Zers want to open their own business. And by the way, super sharp generation. I mean, I think one of the things that happens is people start ripping on generations like in this wholesale way. I think that's a horrible idea. I mean, some of the sharpest people I know are Gen Zers. But I can tell you this. I would say to my kids, I have 6 adult kids now, but millennials down to Gen Z. I say, you guys, men and women, if you ever wonder whether or not you have a strategic advantage over others, look at the way your contemporaries think.
Yeah.
Okay? When they think this way, and that's your competition, you will crush them.
Yep.
And that's true.
Yeah. No, that's good. So one of the comments that we received here, the success of society depends on the low-paid entry-level jobs, the cleaners, I think it's caterers, maybe carers, road sweepers, cab drivers, garbage collectors, sewage workers, et cetera, et cetera. This prig's life would be an abject one without them. Barry, what's going on, brother?
Yeah, he was responding to a short that Aiden, our Gen Zer, by the way, he listened to one of my presentations and he liked this particular section. That's what's always so funny is a Gen Zer. And so he picked this section to put out there. And I'm more or less saying, you're going to be useless as an employee if you think that you can have low performance, not accept responsibility, and not work hard, and be rewarded for that. That's the worst thing in the world. Merit matters. Do something that provides value and watch people want to reward you. There's a cynical thing that happens in these comments where people say, well, basically no good leaders ever want to reward anyone and all leaders lie. Well, I know there are some, there's no doubt about it. But for the most part, you can't build a great organization that way. So you're generally speaking in a bad organization that doesn't retain good people if that's what your life experience is. But people become jaded. So this guy's default position, because I say you need to work hard with merit in order to be rewarded, he immediately tells me that I have no appreciation for the common man. Okay? I don't even know quite how to respond to that when my mother, did in-home daycare. Okay, and taught grade school. My dad was an engineer who could have built and led big companies, but chose to live a more simple life because of his family. When some of my great heroes in life are like my first grade teacher, who I just saw this weekend. My son, Kevin, my oldest son, was just ordained a priest. Oh, by the way, there's an example of it. Hey, here's the goal that I want you to have in life, okay? The goal is I want you to completely sacrifice your life to the highest cause, God out there, and live with a vow of simplicity, okay, and obedience to others. That's not really the guy who's not able to relate to the common man. I mean, anyway, but my first grade teacher was at his ordination. She was also his teacher. And you've heard me reference her before, by the way. As often probably as I would reference anybody of great wealth, because I don't look at things and income as the outcome of success, even though I have many things and a lot of money. I look at being a good steward to what you were given and living that out the proper way as what matters.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be rude here. I actually wanted to pull up the post that we posted this morning on your behalf, Dave. But it's your words. A successful person is the person who follows the proper calling that they have and they become fully who they are supposed to be.
Yes, exactly.
That's exactly what
fully
you're
who they're
referencing.
supposed to be. That's exactly right.
It's good to note, obviously, from a relatability standpoint, you've been there, done that. So you don't undermine the working class. You don't undermine the person who's doing the, trading their time for money, so to speak.
No, I mean, I love and admire that person in every way.
Just the same, exactly like we just mentioned. Now, from the age of, I believe it was 20, that's when you started working for Cutco. Is that when you started leading others, or how did your career transition from you're doing all these jobs to now working for Cutco?
Yeah, I guess I didn't identify when I was leading before that as leadership. If I was the captain of a team, or I just had a group of friends that kind of naturally took to some of the leadership that I did. Because, leading back then was like, hey, let's all go play basketball at this park, and you make a phone call and everybody wants to come along. Right. I don't think you didn't think of it like that. I didn't spend much time thinking, am I leading or not leading? Then when I got into the Cutco business, I realized that I was okay at sales. I had a certain amount of liking for it, and I had a proficiency in it, but I didn't have a passion for selling like I did leading, and it was a natural thing. And some people have a total passion for selling, and you can see it. They're like, oh, I sell. I'm a salesperson. I sell. That's what I do. I can sell anything, and they're excited about the topic. That was leadership for me. So I had an admiration for sales, and I had a capacity for it, but I had a love for leading. And I think if you have a disdain for the thing you're leading, or you don't have an ability to be effective in it at all, you're going to have a hard time leading it. But you have to have a certain level of understanding of it at least. And so all of a sudden I found myself sitting in meetings, watching the leaders influence people, and just through intuition being able to say, that is not going to work. These people are going to be so bummed out after that talk, they're not going to perform. And then other times go, boy, that was really effective, and these people are going to perform. Or that system for guiding these people, whether it be a weekly schedule or contact or reporting, that is going to run against the grain, and it's going to hurt their ability to get things done, or that's going to accelerate it. And these were things that when I would see them became obvious to me. And but it was observational. I wasn't in that role. Then when I got a chance to actually start my own business in that capacity, I applied some of those things. And you know what's interesting, Nico? Is I was wrong sometimes. I was like, oh, that thing that in my youth I thought would be bad was actually really good. And the thing that I thought would work didn't work. So I had to adapt and say, you don't know everything here. And that really helped. But for the most part, those intuitions were on. And then I was able to move those things ahead.
Dave, I know we were talking a little bit offline, and there are people who have these leadership programs and seminars and that sort of thing, and they're thinking of it from a non-evidence-based perspective, meaning that they've got all sorts of certifications and trainings and that sort of thing. But what you're saying is that even though your intuition was mostly right, you actually tested these theories in leadership position, and you can, so to speak, actually speak into those a little bit better because you've had the experience.
Yeah, so I remember going through this transition when I was young. I was thinking, okay, my intuition is telling me this, and even some of my experience. And so I formed very strong opinions when I was young in leadership. And I could back them up because I was the top performer in the company. And it was a big company. Like there were, it was nationwide, like 600-700 offices across the country and tens of thousands of people in the organization. And, but then I remember going and watching other people, and some of them would beat me in certain categories. And I was like, that is not at all the way I lead this. And I had this decision point, and it was like I could be right to my own demise or wrong to my own prosperity and say, wow, if I could adopt that, what could happen? And I think by way of survival, I wanted to be a top performer. I was like, well, I better evolve here. But there were times where I was reluctant to do so. And because of that, I fell a little bit further behind. And so I learned the lesson early on that there are many different ways to do certain things, not all right, not all wrong. And then there are other categories where there are absolutely right and wrong ways to do it. And knowing the difference really mattered.
So now you're leading a team in Cutco. So you were leading, obviously, before you knew you were effectively leading, but you're actually
leading. Yeah, because I was like 19 or 20 when I was doing that. I was in college.
Okay. How did you stumble upon this opportunity first and foremost? Because I feel like people don't really know how to pick a career, where to go. They're kind of just stifled in that. Okay.
I literally didn't know. I mean, I was so naive, Nico, when I was young about so many different things. I didn't really know what business was.
Yeah, we talked about that last time. That was good.
But I found myself in sales, and then I found myself in leadership, and I thought, okay, well, I'm starting to get a grasp of this. I know that I'm not going to be an educator. I'm not going to be an accountant. I'm not going to be an engineer. But I like this sort of thing. I like building and leading teams. How can you do that? Well, build and lead teams in a company. And then I realized I want to do this on my own. I want to build my own company at some point. But
why didn't you at 20? Like, everyone wants to start with no experience.
I didn't know how.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, there are certain things I know, and there are certain things that I don't know. How do you set up a company?
Yeah.
How do you legally do this? Where do you find people for this? How do you identify a market? If you're going to pick here I'm selling Cutco knives. I know how to sell knives, but you get myopic. And you don't realize that everything is sold. I was just talking to somebody the other day, And they said, yeah, we sell, what was it? On solar panels in farm fields, there's a part that allows it to move. That's what we sell.
Wow.
And I was like, everybody sells something or makes something or manufactures something. And, but most people, in fact, I've learned this, most people can't see outside of what it is they do. And they don't really know how. I remember when I was young in the Cutco business, I went down to Florida. I think it was in Fort Lauderdale or Miami. And I was with a friend and we were on a boat. And we went by a guy's house, and I should look this up, but he was the founder of Sunglasses Hut.
Wow.
And he had quite a place. And by the way, whether or not my friend accurately identified which was his home and whatnot, but it was a big, beautiful home worth I don't know how many millions, with all sorts of Ferraris and stuff that you could see barely as you were coming back around, and big, beautiful yacht. And I thought, sunglasses, my goodness. That little Sunglasses Hut that I go by every time produced that sort of opportunity for this particular person. And I was influenced by that. And I thought, what would the product be that I would have? And so what I did was, simultaneously, two things happened. I kept getting sucked further into the Cutco business because my performance allowed me to advance and carry more responsibilities until I was running an entire country and like 6 states of the organization, and I was young. So now I was actually kind of trapped. I was earning a lot of money. I had a young family, and it was so much money at the time that I was comfortable, but not enough for me to be able to just make the leap and do something more. As my kids got older, and I had 6 of them, I was doing the math on retirement, on college, and everything else, and I was saying, okay, I'm like in the worst place in the world. I'm secure for the moment. So I need to make a change. And if I make that change, I can build something else. So I'd come home every day and I started designing in my own mind what type of company that I wanted to build, but I didn't know what the product was going to be. I knew what the culture was going to be. I knew how big I wanted the opportunity for the people affiliated to be. I knew I wanted it to be scalable, but I just didn't know what it was. And it was kind of driving me crazy. And then all of a sudden I was walking along in an airport, and a friend of mine called and mentioned that his friend's brother sold ads for this local mom and pop magazine in a small little town. And I've heard people tell me about businesses and their brother and their friend and what they do all day long. For whatever reason, it was like love at first sight when it comes to businesses. And I got it. And I said, that's a business that I can scale. And so I started it with 2 other partners as a side hustle until I turned it into hundreds of millions of dollars and simultaneously built other companies alongside that. But what was cool is I was able to take, how old was I when I did that?
I was going to ask you that same question.
38 when I started the company,
Wow.
38
Okay.
years old. Waiting until I was 38 seemed like forever.
Yeah.
But I was 38 when I did it. It incubated for a lot of years, really didn't have much success until year 6. And then it started to really take off. I mean, I was a not so silent partner, still in the Cutco business. And so this was on the side, and it was doing $500,000 a year for like 6 years. And then something that happened that I wouldn't have expected, but I sadly went through a divorce and I lost everything. And I knew I had to start over again. And that was a part, along with other parts of my stories, when I mentioned I was fired by a friend who just texted me this weekend. It was the greatest text. He's just such a great guy. Yeah. And he knew this about me even before I knew. He's like, Dave, I got to set you free, man. You're not making this decision to go do something on your own, and I have to make it for you. You go. Wow. Yeah. And so I did. And we went from $500,000 in sales for like 5 years to then tens of millions just a couple years later to 100 million, like 7 years later, and then hundreds of millions now at this point. Private and owned privately, so I can't see the actual revenues amount, but that's what happened.
I think from some of our commenters and kind of just the general sentiment on online, people think that somebody in your position was potentially spoon-fed or they were given this opportunity. But not only were you in a position where you're like, man, I don't even have enough money to retire, let alone take care of like my kids in their future, to completely like going to like financially decimated position through divorce and all that and getting fired, to now really starting from like level zero.
Yeah.
Where was your mind at? Like when you're
not
pushing,
in a good spot.
Yeah.
I mean,
How
it
do you
was
do that?
not like literally every single day. It was hard to wake up. I was never diagnosed with depression, but I had to have been. It was very, very, very hard. That was like, when I look back on that, just your family falling apart and you see the pain that your kids are going through, a dream that you had that now is not happening, realizing that you only have half the control in the circumstance anyway, and so you feel a little bit powerless with it. There's an aspect of feeling like an injustice takes place, and probably anybody who's gone through divorce feels that on both sides. I mean, I'm not trying to point fingers, but in my particular circumstance, it's interesting, when it comes to like paying out hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in child support, and at this point I wasn't making it. The laws are just kind of funny, and the injustice in my head, I couldn't get rid of it. I was like, wait, if I don't make that payment, I go to jail? But I don't get anything in return? Like, there's no consequence on that end.
Right.
And there's a reception. Like, they receive hundreds of thousands, and I work hard, and if I don't do it, I go to jail. But I don't get anything, and that person just receives with no consequence. Right. Now, my ex-wife didn't set up the laws, so that's not a personal attack, and she's the mother of my children. That's a wonderful thing to all be there. So it wasn't about that. It was just about the circumstance and like saying, oh my gosh, I have to do this. And that number was there, by the way, even without income. I went 6 years without earning $1 when I built Best Version Media. And I had all these things happening. And what I needed to do is I needed to have peace in my life. I needed to say, here are the places I need forgiveness. Here's the places I need unity. Here's the places where I am tired and angry and short and frustrated, that I just have to have peace. And I remember, and we just did a segment earlier this morning where I said, you need to mentor or be mentored in life. Oftentimes both. But I started mentoring. I had guys coming to me that were in a difficult spot like that. And I remember they would tell me their story, and I would say, here's the thing. And a lot of times they have made big mistakes that caused the challenges that they had in their lives. And so there are a lot of reasons to feel regret. And I just said, here's the thing that you do. You be good, and be good, act good. And if you do that, you will feel good. No matter what anybody else thinks of you, no matter what are the mistakes that you made. And if you look at history, some of the people who made the biggest mistakes that were the most public in the world, they've been forgotten. The mistakes have been forgotten. And people remember them differently. In fact, what makes that person great is the fact that they overcame the mistakes that they made. They owned them, they admitted them, and they became better as a result. And there's a Catholic book, I think it's Saints Behaving Badly, I think it's what it's called. And it's the stories of saints before their conversion and the way they lived. Wow. And we have to remember that there's that sort of thing. So I just remember saying, I have to do good things for others. I have to have hope in the future. And I have to be creative about how to get there. I didn't like telling my story or even talking this way at all. Yep. The only reason I do this now is because there are so many men and women in pain who feel like there is no hope. So I'm getting married in July. It's the most beautiful woman. My wife, as you know, was killed a few years ago in that Waukesha parade. Is what I have to put that in there because people are like, okay, they're just mysteries and things, right? If somebody were to send me a picture of this weekend when I was together with all my kids. Now, when when my fiance and I get together, she has 3 and I have 6, most married or whatever. Plus I have 7 grandkids. When we get together, there's 22 of us.
Wow.
Just 22 without extended family, just immediate family and beneath. Yeah. It's a big group. If you were to take a picture of this weekend, and my son was ordained a priest this weekend too, the week before my other son graduated from Madison. He gets married in 4 weeks. I get married in 6 weeks. We have a grandson coming in August. It's a big year. But if you were to take a picture of that, or if we were all together here in the Dave Cave, okay, and you were to send it to me when I was at my lowest moment, and say, what do you think this picture is? The first thing I would have said is, who's that woman? Wow. Well done. Yeah. But I would have said, I don't even know how that's possible. Right. And if a description of where my life was now was there, I wouldn't know that it was possible. But you start to learn that all things can be restored, and you just need to have hope in order to get there. And that, easy isn't necessarily part of it.
One thing that I've noticed is anytime that you do share your story, and when it's business, it's business. When we talk business, we talk, shop, it's serious, right? Mm-hmm. And not to say this isn't serious, but the comments that we get on those shorts when you share, I started over at 41 or 42. I went through this divorce. Mm-hmm. So many people are in pain and they feel hopeless, right? And I think sharing that, and to your point, looking forward and talking to, Dave a little over a decade ago and showing, hey man, we're going to get through it. And you're actively doing this right now to many people in your shoes 10 plus years ago that are currently living this now. Yeah. I mean, you already touched on this, but how does that make you feel? And more importantly, what does that do to the mission of what we have going on here? I
don't mind telling you that to a certain degree, it makes me feel uncomfortable. Okay. One of the things that I have not liked over the years is telling my story. I would rather remain a little bit more private and personal in that regard. It wasn't until I was basically convinced by some other very good people that it was selfish to not tell it. Sure. And I'll tell you the reasons that I don't like telling it, because so many other people have a better story, and a bigger story, and a story of greater suffering, and a story of more intensity, and so that I almost in a way don't really feel worthy of that. But also, to a lot of people, those stories are a little out of reach for them. And I think because my story contains both some pretty elaborate tragedies that took place, and also some very, very common ones, that it is a little bit more relatable. Yep. But I don't think here's the thing, it's just one of many. Yep. And if you hear many stories like this, you say, oh, I can do that. So I was convinced by some very good people to more or less just throw it out there in the mix of many stories, that if it helps one or two people, it helps them. That's.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's helpful because, there's you said this yourself on our posting, there's only one of you, so be the best you possible. And believe it or not, I think that the fact that you're in the position that you are now, hearing that story gives a lot of people hope, knowing that whatever tragedy that they're going through right now, their specific circumstances, they also have the hope that they can overcome, right? Yeah. Especially because you've accomplished so much. There's not many people that can say, I've built a 9-figure business and done X, Y, and Z. A lot of people maybe share similar tragedies, but then to go from that to then build this. So now you've incubated BVM. Yep. You're 5 years into it, making $500,000 a year in revenue. How do you go from getting fired, living in a small cabin, trying to get through the drudgery of like this depressive mindset, so to speak, to then building this great organization, which by the way is like one of the top companies with best work culture. So it's not coming from this dark place, so to speak. It actually like does a lot for people where they're like excited to like join you and work there. How do you make that switch?
Well, that was an important thing. I said, oh, you know what I want to do is I want to build something where when people are a part of it, they feel great. And I remember thinking, and I called it Best Version Media on purpose, because our logo had 4 squares or three squares and like a sunburst, and it meant something. Yeah. One of the quadrants was to be the best version of the product that we offer, service that we offer. We want to make sure it's the best. Okay, and whenever we're looking at it, how do we make it better? And that we're committed to this. The next one was to provide the best opportunity that could possibly exist for any one of our people. How can we create that environment for people to have the best opportunity, no matter what their role is? How do we make that a better role or more exciting? Or if that role is pretty static and it can't go very far, how can we provide an opportunity for the person in it to go to the next level and to do something more? And then we had a unique experience where we had, readership besides having a product itself that we were building in the magazines and the media. So how do we have a readership experience be the best experience that can possibly be? So we had the advertising experience, we had the opportunity experience, we had the reader experience. But then the sunburst was the most important thing, and that was to be the best version of yourself. Wow. And I would tell people, listen, it's not so matter what you do that matters. It's who you become when you do what you do that matters. And I want everybody who comes into Best Version Media, whether they have a short stay or a long stay, to say, I am better because of that. They'll never forget it. And so let's just create that environment, and we'll provide a little bit something more. Teaching the virtues is a big part of that within the organization, because if a person becomes a better person, they become more courageous, they have more fortitude, they have a better sense of justice and judgment, they have greater self-control and temperance, they make better decisions, they're better, more prudential, and they leave. They never forget where they learned that, and they're grateful. And you have a bunch of ambassadors in the world out there who are grateful for the time that they spent when they were there, and they see that, and that spins up within the organization to be better. So I always told people, listen, I have a question. If you have two different organizations that have equal resources, the same markets, the same money, the same technology, but one group of those people is committed to being the best version of themselves, which one's going to win? That one, by far. When Peter Drucker said that culture eats strategy for breakfast, that's what he's talking about. So if you have a collective group of people who individually are interested in becoming the best version of themselves, they do better. One of the reasons I called it that, and I've said this before, is because some people are very attracted to best version. What do you mean best version? Yeah, I love the idea of being best version of myself. I'm attracted to the organization because that's part of your philosophy. Now, there are many people who use that as a facade, and then once you get in, they can see that it doesn't mean anything. No, that doesn't work. You have to actually be that. Which means, by the way, you're not a bunch of perfect people running around, acting perfect, pretending you're perfect. That was never our model. It was never a model of excellence. We're all excellent. No. We're a bunch of fumbling, mistake-making people who are interested in being better every single day. Therefore, we forgive each other when we make mistakes. We own our mistakes. But the idea of being no mistakes, no, sorry, that's someplace else, okay? We don't want mistakes, okay? We want to avoid all of them, but they're going to happen. And knowing they're going to happen makes me forgive you for them, you forgive me for them, but both of us committed to doing more. I looked at it as an interpersonal relationship. If you've ever been in a relationship with somebody who says, that's just the way I am, accept it, that's a living hell. Because that person never accepts that from somebody else. If you said to the person who says, that's just the way I'm accepted, that's just the way I'm accepted, they'd say, no, I won't. Now, it's different if you're like, you know what, I am that way. I know I'm that way. I gotta be better. But just, I'm inclined to be that way, so it might happen occasionally, but I'll recognize it, and if you remind me, you have my commitment to become better than that. That's If you have the pressure of being perfect and your natural inclinations that you might have that are not for you, maybe you're the person who, when you're hungry and tired, gets crabby. Well, if you're like, the pressure is so great that if I'm hungry and tired and I get crabby, that this person will now treat me harshly or leave me, that's too much pressure. And it usually creates more frustration and anger. But that person knowing, hey, I know that if you're like that, and I point it out, or you recognize it, you're going to change that behavior. I'll be there for you when you're like that, if you're there for me to be better. And that same thing is reciprocated, because nobody's perfect. If you can create that environment in the workplace, people respect it, they have gratitude for it, they make it happen. Like, people ask, what was your strategic advantage in building BVM? That was it. It wasn't the product. It wasn't. By the way, whenever private equity companies looked at us, or we were even bought by private equity, they say, of any company in our portfolio, you're ironically, because one of our main products was a print product at the time, people were leaving print and we're growing like crazy. Yeah. You're one of the most technologically advanced organizations we've ever worked with, our back office and everything else. But it wasn't the fact that our back office was the best. It wasn't the fact that our people outperformed everybody just by default with the way that they sold the products. It was because everyone in the organization, now nobody can say this to be true. Everyone in the organization was always committed to being the best version of themselves. That's impossible. There were probably some people in the organization that were happy others were interested in becoming the best version of themselves while they kind of hid, being not so much that. But for the most part, the collective energy that people had, and still do, about that was so unbelievably palpable. And that is, now there are people who diminish that. They go, oh no, it's the technology. Oh no, it's your access to financing. Oh, it's your strategic this or that. That is naive. Now, it's not that those things can't actually be real and catapult you like many companies have, but it's about whether or not that can be sustained there. So even if they have the ability to grow a multi-billion-dollar business because they've got a radical technology or something, you look at how many companies at the top where that company had a problem because of the vice of the leader there who wasn't interested in becoming the best version of themselves. And you and I both know the stories of these companies. Some of the companies were fake, and because of that they collapsed. Other organizations actually had a really good product, but the leader needed to be replaced because their vice was so intense that they couldn't grow. Every single leader has vice. So it's not a matter of finding the perfect leader all the time. It's just a matter of finding that leader who knows their vice and is willing to improve it and get better at it.
That's good. So you've now moved on from being the CEO of Best Version Media. Now talk about that transition and where we are with Leading Giants. You've obviously taken the years of knowledge and expertise that were infused in Best Version Media, and now we're teaching others how to do the same thing, from forming themselves as a giant, so to speak, to becoming a better leader as a CEO. So what was that transition like, and where are you at now?
Well, I still have a very, very active, it's like I'm all in with Best Version Media still as the executive chairman. I'm not the daily operator of the business. The CEO that I promoted, Kevin O'Brien, who's been on the show, is fantastic, which is great because I don't have to worry about daily operation. I always say being the executive chairman is a little bit like being a grandfather, not the father. But I'm involved in acquisitions and growth and some of the financial strategies of the organization. Kevin O'Brien is such a fantastic leader that I always tell him, you don't need me at all. But for whatever reason, he says, I like having you around, so it's nice to have somebody to call, to just run ideas by as a sounding board. And that's nice for me because he's so smart that most of the time I go, I think so too. And then he goes and does the thing that he's saying. But there's an occasional time where I might provide an insight that gets him to think a little bit differently about it. So that is enjoyable, and it takes some time, and it also keeps me sharp and fresh in that regard. But when you go from having 6 kids in the home, younger, to then, while you're a CEO, to having no kids in the home because they're all adults, and you go from CEO to executive chairman, there is a gap in my ability and capacity to do things that I needed to start Leading Giants. So a couple of books coming out, all within the year, starting a podcast, another radio program. We've produced now something in the ballpark of 500 videos in a 4-month period of time, something like that. And Nico, you know this because you're part of this. So when you talk about Leading Giants, you're one of the main engines behind all of this, which is awesome. Not to mention that you're able to even throw a song out there, which is cool. And if you haven't heard the Dragon Slayer song by Nico, you've got to listen to it. Maybe you can put up a little link for that. But anyway. The reason for this, for me, and people ask me what motivates me, at the end of the day, I could give you some neat sounding clip of being driven or da-da-da. I want to go to heaven. For me, that's what it is. It's not the same for everybody, But I always laugh at people that put all the discipline and effort that they have into like eating healthy and financial goals, so that when they're 65, they can retire. And I'm like, what? You get 20 years with a pickleball out of that. That's neat. And a couple of cruises. I mean, and wow, you finally have your Ferrari. To me, like the ultimate retirement plan is what happens when I die. And I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. And I don't want to bury my talents. So that's what drives me personally. Not everybody is driven by that. I work with a lot of people who are not driven by that sort of thing. So I need to have an empathy and understanding for what might drive them ultimately. But what I do know is this: 100% of the people on planet Earth, I have the transcendental desires, which are beauty, goodness, truth, unity. Okay? We all desire beauty. Nobody says I've had enough. We all desire goodness. Nobody says enough of that goodness. Goodness, by the way, is ultimately speaking a thing doing what it was meant to do. If you said that meeting was good, it's because somebody created the meeting and it accomplished what it was supposed to. If you go into a meeting and you don't do anything you was planning in the meeting, somebody says, was that a good meeting? You say, no, it's bad. Now, it's way, way more than that. We know goodness even without saying what goodness is. That was good. That was bad. So we like goodness. We want goodness. We're like, nobody says I've had enough goodness. Now give me some badness. So you've got goodness, you've got beauty, you've got truth. Nobody says that's enough truth now. Start lying to me. Well, some people do want to be lied to, only because in temporary, it might feel better to be lied to. But ultimately speaking, they know the truth and they desire the truth. And unity, we want to be brought together. So when I build organizations and I help people build organizations, I ask them, is it good? Is what you're doing true? Is it good? Is it beautiful? Does it have clarity and symmetry? These are the things that beauty is made up of. And does it bring people together? Is it unified? And if it is, a lot of good things are going to happen. And so I learned a lot through the process.
Well, I love how we went from you at 10 years old to you now in less than an hour. And obviously it doesn't capture every single bit of detail, but it gives enough for the people to understand and the listeners and the audience and so on and so forth to know, who you are and why you can speak into these specific subjects and you're not foreign to the common man. And then you're also have the ability to lead and have had the experience to lead. And two, like where we are with Leading Giants, it's funny because some of the comments will be like, if you're a 9-figure founder, why are you on here trying to sell us a product or what have you? It's literally like he never has to work for the rest of his life, for the record. And he clearly stated that here. The reason why is we want to build giants so that they can lead other giants and move forward, right? Any parting words? I thought this was a great episode, by the way. And for the record, he didn't plan any of the questions that I pitched. I just wanted to make sure that that's known. I'm really genuinely interested. And so, any last words that you have for the audience?
No, I love the way you do this, Nico. I think that, I get comments all the time. Who is this Nico guy? He does a great job. And I think that while there are sometimes, ahead of time, we plan something out, some of the feedback we get is that when you just kind of fire questions at me, people seem to like that a little bit more. Yeah. So I think that they might be saying that you should be constantly writing the content.
That's good. That's good. The parting phrase of the day, Dave.
Well, the parting phrase is very simple. If you can do that, we can go be giants and we can go slay some dragons.
Hey there, Giant. Thanks for watching Durand On Demand. I need your help with something. The world desperately needs more giants. You know it, and I know it. We've been around a lot of people struggling, figuring out how to make things go. So hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, share this with as many people as you can. We're going to build this audience, and we're going to help people slay dragons together.